Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8:03 on LBC. Welcome to Cross Question, LBC's political panel debate show every Wednesday at 8 o'clock. You can watch us on Global Player, on YouTube, on the LBC Facebook page or Twitter feed. And if you'd like to ask our panel a question, the number to call 0345 6060 973. With us on the show tonight, we have the former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. He's also MP for Islington North. Layla Moran is Lib Dem MP for Oxford West and Abingdon and their Foreign Affairs spokesperson. Dr. Liam Fox is former Conservative Defence Secretary. Stewart Hosie is the SNP spokesperson for the Cabinet Office and MP for Dundee East. I think we'd better get on with your questions, don't you?
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's get on to our first question. It's from Wakash in Canary Wharf. Wakash, what's your question, please?
My question is, why is one British company being favoured over all the other ventilating-making companies in Britain just because they texted the Prime Minister directly? That's my question.
OK, Liam Fox.
Well, I don't think they are is the answer to the question. I think that the government did what many in Parliament, including the Labour Party, said, which was to strain every sinew to ensure that we had enough ventilators to deal with the COVID crisis. I think if you had put this round the other way, given that this is referring to the Dyson question, if you'd put it round the other way and we'd got to this point and the government had said, we're not going to make exceptions for any overseas-based scientists or engineers or doctors, and we now face the accusation that the government put raising taxation before protecting lives, that genuinely would be a scandal. What we've heard today, I think, is very far short of that. I think that there's nothing remarkable here at all, other than the fact that we were actually able, as a country and as a government, to be able to provide the NHS with the number of ventilators that we did require, and we didn't see some of the dreadful scenes that we saw in other countries.
Now, it has to be said that I don't think any ventilators were, in the end, provided by James Dyson's company. But the fact of the matter is, he could have got a competitive advantage by the very fact that he just happened to have the Prime Minister's phone number. Should business people use private phone numbers for this kind of purpose?
Well, you say he could have. There's no evidence that he would have got any advantageous treatment other than the same that was being applied to other overseas business people and doctors and scientists and engineers. There was no favourable treatment as far as I can see. Move along. There's no story in this one.
Jeremy Corbyn, is there a story in this?
Yes, I think there is, because James Dyson, who is clearly a brilliant inventor and engineer, was using his contact with the Prime Minister to try to ensure that his senior staff didn't have to pay UK rate taxation whilst they were in Britain, bringing the ventilators to production. The ventilators in the end were never bought anyway. This sort of strange exchange of texts where the Prime Minister says, sorted, I am the First Lord of the Treasury. Well, he is the First Lord of the Treasury. I would have thought, therefore, the Treasury should be making that decision. And if there is to be a tax exemption for very high paid people in foreign companies because of COVID, then he is you should have come to Parliament and there should have been regulations passed to deal with it, as has happened in the past. I seem to remember various regulations surrounding the Olympics, I believe, and the Commonwealth Games after that. Surely it's just not right. And the Ministerial Code requires the Prime Minister to either have a civil servant with him at such a meeting, or if that isn't possible because it's a chance meeting, then to inform the appropriate civil servants immediately. It's not clear if he did that.
I interviewed Lucy Powell, Labour's shadow business minister, earlier, and she was making some of the points that you made there. But I wonder, I mean, you were leader of the Labour Party for 5 years. You must have had texts from people that had your phone number from before you were leader. I'm sure you might have had the odd text maybe from Len McCluskey, who might have said, Jeremy, got this problem, could you help sort it? And you would have then said to one of your colleagues, can you sort this? There's nothing wrong with that, is there?
Yeah, but being leader of the opposition and leader of a political party isn't quite the same thing, unfortunately, as being head of government, where you can basically instruct civil servants what to do. And I think the key words are ones where he said, I am First Lord of the Treasury, consider it sorted. In fact, it apparently wasn't ever sorted. It isn't clear whether the Prime Minister's word ever reached Rishi Sunak anyway. I mean, it sounds to me like a bit of a sort of matey discussion, which didn't come to anything anyway. But the idea that Dyson should ask for it, that is what I'm quite uncomfortable about. We have rates of tax in order to pay for public services like the National Health Service. And in any event, why wasn't there any form of tendering process done on all of this? I recognise it was a hurry, obviously, but some of the contracts that were let were just bizarre and very expensive, and we're all paying for it.
Okay, Layla Moran, what do you make of this, particularly the phone number issue?
So on the one hand, and I think it's fair to say, all of us here have given our phone numbers to people who might have been involved in our parties at various points, supporters, friends, all the rest of it. There is a difference between journalists, indeed. You have mine, Iain.
I have all four of your numbers on my phone.
But there is a difference.
We have used it.
There's a difference between people who text you wanting to advocate on their behalf as members of Parliament, and then people texting government officials, the Prime Minister, in fact, asking them to solve a problem. And it feels very much like we have a two-lane democracy at the moment. And I think that's the bit that feels a bit wrong, regardless of whether or not there was personal gain or not. There does very much seem to be a set of people in this country who do have Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak's phone numbers and can get stuff done and can get contracts awarded or things fixed in their tax affairs or whatever else. And then there's everyone else, which actually includes a lot of opposition MPs as well. I certainly do not have Boris Johnson's phone number, who struggle.
I can give it to you if you'd like it.
Maybe later, Iain. But nevertheless, my constituents, that's the bit that they struggle with. They contacted me all throughout the last year saying, I know there's this VIP lane for PPE contracts. I understand that there are people being awarded it without tender, without transparency. I can't get a look in. Can you help me? And of course I tried. But then as we've had the transparency down the line, it took me, Caroline Lucas and Debbie Abrams taking the government to court with the Good Law Project to reveal the fact that they had these contracts awarded. And we were then assured that they had all been publicly released. And unfortunately, that was not the case. It wasn't the case. There was still about a dozen contracts that we hadn't seen. It's about transparency, Iain. It's not about people contacting people. I think people just want to know what's happened to their own money.
Stewart Hosie, how concerned are you by this? Because I imagine that all politicians will, on some scale, be contacted by people who want something from them. It's actually how you handle it that's the most important thing, isn't it? That you've got to be not just doing the right thing, but be seen to be doing the right thing.
Well, that's absolutely right. Every single MP in government on the backbenches will be contacted by individuals, by campaign groups, by businesses, by trade organisations, looking for help on one issue or another, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's also the case, and I agree with Liam Fox, that it was also right that all governments bust a gut at the beginning to make sure we didn't run out of things like ventilators. That's absolutely correct. What this case, though, demonstrates, and what the David Cameron contact with Rishi Sunak on the Greenshill case demonstrates, is a small number of people with privileged access. Now, the question for us all is, how do we deal with that? And Jeremy Corbyn made the point earlier. If the Ministerial Code insists when such a chance communication happens, it's immediately reported to the Permanent Secretary or put on some register somewhere. Now, I don't know if that happened either. It should do, because transparency is the great disinfectant for all this kind of stuff. And if we could be confident that when one of these privileged communications happened, it was properly recorded and quickly and available for the public to see, I think a lot of the anxiety about this and a lot of the bad smell it leaves, it would dissipate rather quickly.
Jeremy Corbyn, is there anything intrinsically wrong with a senior politician having the private mobile number of top business people or maybe top academics, top trade union leaders? There's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, is there?
No, we've all got phone numbers of lots of people, and we do have text messages from lots of people. It's how you deal with it and how you handle it. And if somebody's asking you to do something that is favourable commercially for them, bypassing a process and a procedure, that's when it becomes questionable and it becomes wrong. If somebody has a problem over their pay or their benefits, they can't text Boris Johnson and say, please sort it out, because he wouldn't give them the time of day. But if you're a businessman of like Dyson apparently wanting to get some fast-track process to avoid taxation of some of their staff, he seems to think that he can use that process. That is the area that concerns me.
Liam, when you were Defence Secretary, I mean, that has a huge procurement division. I imagine that there would have been people who might have been asking you to do things, not necessarily seeking favours, but lobbying you in a certain way.
Well, try being Trade and Investment Secretary, which covers almost the whole of the economy. Of course, people want to try to do it. The question is whether when people do come to raise legitimate concerns with you, for example, if my staff are disadvantaged by tax treatment, you may not get the ventilators you want. Turns out it wasn't the case anyway. But when these questions are asked of you, the question is therefore, can you show that they weren't given preferential treatment over other people because of that relationship? That I think, is what lies at the base of the ministerial code. I mean, clearly on the Dyson, this is a bit of a red herring, because James Dyson asked for something that actually was given to other people, but not to him in the end, and he was going to supply ventilators, which he didn't supply to the NHS anyway. The question, I think, is when people ask for special treatment, can ministers show that they acted in a fair, transparent way and ensure that they protect themselves by getting those records kept?
Let's get a quick reaction from Wakash, who asked the question originally. What's your view, Wakash?
My view is that being Boris Johnson as the leader of the country, he should have known the protocol and the SOP of how to deal with such a call. I work for a big global organization, and if I get a call from a customer asking for a favor, I have to report it back, even though I'm authorized to do so. And I work for just a global company, whereas Boris Johnson is as a leader of a country. It's just common sense, and it sounds very fishy and weird that he was taking decisions on the government's behalf beforehand, while on the text saying that I will fix it, or I will do this for you, or I'm the Treasury. It's just totally wrong, I think, and okay. I agree with the panel.
Wakash, thank you very much indeed. We'll come to more of your calls and questions in just a moment. The number to call:
Dale on LBC.
It's 19 minutes past 8. My panel: Jeremy Corbyn, Layla, Moran, Liam Fox and Stewart Hosie with me until 9. Let's go to our next question. It's Saeed in Ilford. Hello, Saeed.
Hi there, Iain. What do the panellists make of Keir Starmer's first year in charge of the Labour Party?
Any particular panellist you're aiming this one at?
I think that's patently obvious. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say.
Saeed, thank you very much for your question. Well, let's start off with you, Jeremy Corbyn, because I'm sure everyone would love to hear your take on the first year of Keir Starmer's leadership.
Leading the Labour Party is not an easy job. And I think you have to be inclusive of all people in the party and make sure their voices are heard and make sure the democracy of the party is fully intact, because that is the absolute lifeblood of it. And I say that as somebody who joined the Labour Party in 1966. I've been 55 years in the Labour Party this year. I've held every position there is in the party, from street collector to leader. And I've often agreed with or disagreed with people, but I've always fought my corner. But I've always fought it in an inclusive way. And I think you should remember that the strength of the Labour movement is the inclusivity of the entirety of its membership and the breadth of its political opinions.
He's not being very inclusive towards you, though, is he? Because you are not actually formally a Labour MP anymore. You're an independent MP.
I'm very proud to be a Member of Parliament for Islington North. I'm a member of the Labour Party at the moment. I'm not a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party. That is not my decision. That is not my wish. And I'm representing the people that I was elected to represent in the first place.
What do you think the best thing he's done over the last year, and what do you think maybe you'd like to have seen done a little different?
I would like us to have been much more assertive against the government on the corona crisis, because I think we haven't challenged them enough on the inefficiency of the private sector track and trace. We haven't challenged them enough on the lack of transparency in the deals that have been done. And it took an awful lot of pressure initially from John McDonnell and John Ashworth in the early part of 2020 to make them even consider, the government that is, even consider a furlough scheme. And the consequences of all this now are serious mental health crisis, poverty, and increasing rates of unemployment in the poorest parts of this country. So I think we could and should have been much sharper against them that time. There was too much inclusivity with the government.
And the thing he's done best?
It's very beguiling when you're the leader of the opposition to be invited into the the big room, where they do all the secret deals. It's got lots of microphones and lights and spotlights and overhead screens and projectors and God knows what. And the coffee is second rate, but there you go. And they try to make you feel absolutely part of it. You're not. You're there because you're the opposition and you're there to ask the questions.
You experienced three different Conservative Prime Ministers, David Cameron, Theresa May and Boris Johnson. Which of those, sorry, it's completely going off the question, but I thought I'd ask it anyway. Which of those did you find most easy to deal with and most productive, and which did you find most difficult?
Well, Boris Johnson was the most light-hearted, as you'd imagine. I'll give an example of this. I phoned him up when he became Prime Minister to congratulate him on that. And I said, sort of at the end of the conversation, it was quite short, I said, is Parliament going to sit through the summer? Is it coming back? Are you going to be around? Is there going to be a recess? Whatever, because it was July. And he said, no, I'm in the boat, my hands are firmly lashed to the oar and I'm paddling away. I said, well, if your hands are lashed to an oar and you're paddling firmly, then this boat is going to go round in circles and continue going round in circles, which he thought was quite good. But then, unfortunately, he completely lost me because he went off into Greek at that point. I was some story about the Greek wars, which completely lost me. Theresa May was extremely serious and very well prepared for every meeting we ever had with her. And we had a number during Brexit issues. And David Cameron was, well, full of being David Cameron. It was like meeting somebody from the Bullingdon Club. It was like meeting a member of the Bullingdon Club.
Right. For the other three on the answer to this question, I'm going to ask you to try to take off your party political hats and become political pundits for the next few minutes. So what do you make of Keir Starmer's first year in charge of Labour? Layla Moran.
Well, first of all, I think I'm quite bewildered by the polls because from what...
Well, you're a Liberal Democrat.
Well, polls for Labour, because given how... the country has suffered one of the highest death rates per capita in the world because of coronavirus. We just had a question about, the chumocracy that we're beginning to see at the top of government. You would expect them to be doing worse. And therefore, your eyes cast to the opposition, of which we are part, I accept that, but you look towards the Labour Party and you're wondering, well, why aren't they landing the blows that they should be landing at this point? So I think that's coming back to Jeremy's point. And there have been points where the prevarication of the Labour Party, sitting on the fence, not taking a position, has been quite frustrating. And I wonder if that is reflected in people not really knowing what Keir Starmer stands for. On the other hand, I'm out door knocking every day, and Oxford West and Abingdon, much as it's touted as a Conservative-facing seat, actually we have many of our council seats are Labour-facing, and many of our council seats are also Tory-facing. In the Labour-facing seats, actually, people like him. They feel that he's serious, that he is forensic, and they want him to do better. So I think the jury is still out, to be perfectly honest. And it's been a strange year in politics where it's been very hard for anyone to get a word in edgeways if you're not the government, because at times of crisis, what people want to hear is what the government has to say, because they want that level of leadership. And
well, that must be quite concerning for you as a Liberal Democrat, though, surely, because you won your seat originally, presumably, by squeezing the Labour vote. And if they think that Keir Starmer is a future Prime Minister, they could take those votes back away from you.
Yes, although the other dynamic that happens, which is a really important one, is that all those swing voters who would normally not vote Labour or would consider other parties suddenly realise that actually Labour are viable. They don't really mind a Labour government, and actually in Tory-facing seats would rather vote Lib Dem in order to kick out the Tory so that they could potentially get a Labour government. So if you look back at Lib Dem seats that have been won over time, actually we tend to do better when you have a rising tide of Labour votes. And the reason for that is because then we can say to Labour voters, well, if you, or people who are considering Labour who sort of might swing between the two, if you actually do want a Labour government, the best thing you should do is to vote Liberal Democrat in those seats. I think these are going to be really interesting elections coming up in May the 6th. I honestly don't know which way they're going to go for any party. I think we could have some quite big surprises on May the 6th, not least because many of the political parties haven't been out there being able to talk to their voters as they normally would. And I'll be really interested to see what happens on the day.
All right, Stewart Hosie, what do you make of Keir Starmer's first year?
He's a very intelligent man. He's a technocrat, and therefore one would have imagined his attention to detail would have contrasted extremely well with Boris Johnson, who has no attention to detail whatsoever. But he hasn't cut through. He hasn't broken through. The poll numbers are extraordinarily bad, given the mistakes and some of the things that are going on within the Tory party and the government. I suspect it probably is because we don't know what he stands for. And the way that he and others have abandoned the Remain cause, which was the real differentiator in large measure, I think leaves people rather cold as to what it is the Labour Party under Keir Starmer actually stand for and what it is they're actually for. So it's a surprise in some ways, but I think the lack of knowing what it is he actually believes in is leaving him open to just being buffeted by the political winds. And the closer and closer and closer we get in the next 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years to a UK election, unless he's put down a mark as to what it is Labour are for, then I suspect the result for Labour might be pretty bad. But again, time will tell.
Liam.
Well, someone had told me back when we first came to office in 2010 that 11 years later, we'd actually be further ahead in the polls than we were then. I'm not sure I would have believed them. And so from a purely Conservative point of view, it's been excellent that we've been able to establish this level of political dominance. However, I think there are a number of things that you have to take into account. Number one, it's been a very unusual year. Our politics has been dominated by a single issue, where the government's fortunes have fluctuated, determined by whether the public think the government's doing well or not in relation to the crisis. There's no doubt that the phenomenally successful rollout of the vaccine has boosted the government's standing enormously. Below that, I think you've got the personalities of leaders. You've got, if you like, instinct versus intellect in terms of the leaders. There's no doubt that Boris Johnson has got an extraordinarily sharp political instinct. I think that what we saw over the Super League, for example, was a very good example of that. And there's no doubt that Keir Starmer
might come on to that
is very well. There's no doubt that he's very bright, Keir Starmer. But again, it's very difficult to know what is it that differentiates his Labour Party from either the Labour Party that went before or from some of the other parties. And I think there's a wider question, Iain, in this, in that if you're on the centre-right of British politics, it's easy to know who you should vote for. If you're on the centre-left, it's much more difficult to see. I've always thought there was a clear place for a well-defined social democratic party in the UK politics, and I think there's a place for a socially and economically liberal party in the way that the classic Liberals were. And I remember being on a flight with David Cameron, since Jeremy mentioned leaders, that when we were talking about the Tory party, and he said, I regard myself as a liberal conservative, Liam, how do you regard yourself? And I thought for a moment, thinking it might be a career-defining answer, and almost certainly was. And I said, well, I regard myself as an unreconstructed free market liberal, Thatcherite, unionist, Eurosceptic Atlanticist.
Covering all your bases there.
It's a fairly broad church in the Tory party. But I think there's a serious point about differentiation in our politics. And I think that for politicians on the centre left, maybe it's presumptuous for me to say, but there needs to be better definition for people to know what the alternatives to the Conservatives are in government, because history tells us that the Conservatives are the dominant party in British politics unless the opposition has a very clear idea of exactly what it stands for and can vocalise that in a very clear way.
Jeremy, let me just finish off with a question to you, which is directly related to this. You were absolutely brilliant at enthusing the Labour Party troops. You got the membership up to, what was it, 600,000, I think at one point. You could command huge audiences in a way that a more technocratic leader like Keir Starmer never could. But on the other hand, because he's technocratic, people kind of may see him more as a serious alternative Prime Minister than maybe they saw you. It's quite difficult to get that balance, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot of people in this country that feel politics doesn't work for them. They feel unrepresented and feel that nobody's very interested in them, particularly young people. And my whole point of politics is that you've got to speak up for people and offer them some real hope and some real change, which is why I put forward policies on ending tuition fees, on universal free education and public ownership of mail, rail and water. I also said about universal free broadband. Condemned at the time, just about everybody in the world is in favour of it now, including President Biden. So I think the radical policies we put forward did strike a chord with people. But remember this, that the media, I'm not going to go at you here, Iain, the media in this country is not exactly balanced or fair. It is not democratically run or owned in any way. And the levels of abuse that were heaped on senior figures in the Labour Party, including me, for the past 5 years, are absolutely extraordinary by any stretch of the imagination. So I think people should reflect on that. And many of the people that came to our rallies in both the general elections I fought as well as the leadership campaigns came there because they wanted to be able to participate in something. And that's what we were offering.
I take the point about them.
That joined the party were phenomenal, 600,000 members.
No, absolutely. Just on the media point, though, I spent 5 years trying to entice you onto my programme because we'd always had some very good exchanges before you became leader on the programme. Yeah. You were often on. And I tried to entice you over 5 years, and I think John McDonnell was my spokesman with you trying to do that. But it never happened. And I still don't know why, because our listeners were people I would have thought that you should be making every effort to win over. Whether it's your media advisors who took against us for some reason, I don't know. But I found that quite a difficult one.
Handling the media is never easy. And OK, Iain, I'll make up for it. I'll come on again if you'll have me.
I'll hold you to it. We'll have a whole hour together, shall we? We can chew a bit of fat over an hour. Okay, right. We'll move on. We're going to talk about the European Super League in just a second. That's our next question. It's 8:35. Let's get the latest news.
Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Jeremy Corbyn, Layla Moran, Liam Fox and Stewart Hosie with me until 9 o'clock. We've got a happy customer. Keith in Exeter says, I've been really impressed on how open and honest your guests have been tonight. It would be nice to see more of that in Parliament. Well, let's see if that continues. Let's go to David in Oxford. Hi, David.
Good evening, Iain. A very good evening, esteemed panel. I have two questions for you. My name is Sully from the OGCC. I don't think the Super League realised the carnage it would cause to all the children who are affiliated to football clubs and the damage it would do for these children. And secondly, do you think the government, Mr. Corbyn, were right to intervene on this occasion?
Right, well, we'll put those questions to all of the panel. Stewart, let's start with you.
First of all, in terms of this European Super League nonsense, if you look at the trajectory of football over the past 3 decades, this is not a surprise. You know, we had the Bosman ruling, freedom of contract. Good players could then move to the bigger clubs, mainly in the bigger leagues. Then we had all the TV money, which obviously went to the bigger leagues. That's where the market was. Then UEFA changed their competitions so that the European Cup for winners became the Champions League, where teams that were 4th and 5th off the pace, managed to get into the Premier competition. All the power and money went to a small number of powerful clubs in an even smaller number of very powerful leagues. So this European Super League proposal for a closed shop was not a surprise. What has been good is the backlash, and not just from the fans of the clubs involved, because what these proposals do, they take teams with huge European pedigrees, Benfica, Feyenoord, Ajax, Celtic, they carve them out. They take English clubs with incredible European pedigrees. Your team, Iain, who won the Cup Winners' Cup in '65, West Ham United.
I'm impressed.
That's okay. Ipswich Town that won the UEFA Cup, Nottingham Forest. Even if all of those English clubs managed to get back to their old glories, they could never pit themselves against this closed league club. That's not sport. Now, the prescription as to what UEFA does, what the local federations do, all I would say is, I hope they don't roll over and give these greedy clubs any more money.
Well done, well saved.
Any more power. I hope they try and return equity to football so all the clubs from all the leagues can actually play in proper, respected, decent competitions. And to answer the two questions directly, it is going to have an impact on kids. What's the appeal if it's going to cost you $2,000 if you were, say, an Arsenal fan to travel to your away match at Juventus? No kid's ever going to go and be able to see that. That's never going to happen. And as for whether the government right to intervene, yes, there were, except if it can be political for just a minute. 5 days of rioting in Northern Ireland, Boris Johnson said nothing. 24 hours of football, and he's all over the telly. So they were right to intervene, but, there are other priorities for the Prime Minister as well.
Layla, are you a football fan?
So I have a confession to make, which is that I am not, but I live in a house with an ardent Chelsea fan who has been schooling me on how appalling this has been over the last few days. And I do sit there while we watch as Chelsea and West Ham and Leicester City scrap it out for that top 4 place, which I'm assured is the thing to get.
Don't forget Liverpool.
And Liverpool indeed. But the point is, this is greed that takes away that excitement. Okay, or not one that I personally have, but for all those fans who are hoping that 1 year that their team will just about make it, that unpredictability of football, the way that we see in the FA Cup, you have the teams that came from nowhere to go to glory, that would have been gone because everyone else would have been excluded. And I think what it's speaking to is a general trend, as Stewart was saying, of the more money that has poured into football, the more remote it has seemed from fans. I think this review by Tracy Crouch, who I really rate actually as an MP, and I've worked with her on other things, including the Vagrancy Act and homelessness in the past, and I do trust her to look at this from the point of view of fans, because she is a massive football fan in of her own right. I think actually we should look at that review very carefully. I hope that she's given complete free rein to do what she needs to do. And I'm really attracted by the idea of putting the fans in charge. In Germany, they've got a 50+1 rule, which means the majority rule of the fans. I actually think we should be bringing in legislation so that if you are going to join in new super leagues, actually ticket holders should be balloted, for example. Let's put the fans in the driving seat.
Well, just on that, Tracy Crouch has actually been conversing with a German football journalist on that subject today in German. I know that because she messaged me to say, have I got the German right on this? Liam Fox, are you a football fan?
Well, on and off. And I think that I've become a bit more disillusioned with football in recent years, where it's become not the route to opportunity that it was traditionally, or has been traditionally in Britain, for people in a locality joining their local team and then working their way up. What we've recently had are a series of brands where people have been bought in internationally, often with no links to the local community at all, and dependent on the money brought into the club. Now, that's how a market works. I don't think since Gerald Ratner, anyone has misunderstood their market as much as those who made the proposals this particular week. And I think that, for me, the key thing about it, and I'm a free marketeer, my view is that these are private businesses, let them do what they want, but the real sin was the anti-competitive nature of it. Not in any other area of sport would we accept that people would get the position that they have today and hold that in perpetuity in respect of their actual performance. I mean, we've got Wimbledon coming up. What if we saw, the top 10 Wimbledon players decided that they were going to set up their own tournament, it would be a closed shop and no one would get in and no one would have to leave however bad they got. I mean, you would think that was utterly absurd. It is much the same as what was going to happen here. And one of the great things about sport, about everything, is the element of competition, that teams have to perform well or they'll be relegated, and teams have the great opportunity to be promoted if they also do well. If you take that out of sport and you take that interaction going up and down the ladder, you've lost one of the very basic attractions to sport itself.
Jeremy Corbyn, I know you're a devout Arsenal fan. I can imagine yesterday or the day before, steam was coming out of your ears.
Absolutely furious. I live just near the Arsenal Stadium, and two of my sons are Arsenal season ticket holders. One of my sons runs a football club. So, football is around quite a lot. And people around here were just very, very angry about it. They feel that their club has become very corporate anyway, although it does have a very good community programme, and I applaud that part of their work. But this European Super League, whilst it has been knocked on the head pretty firmly over the last couple of days, it's a process that's going to come back and back and back, because the biggest, wealthiest clubs will always want to protect themselves and their market being television sales, kit sales, and all the rest of it. This ESL was a completely crazy idea. Who on earth would want to watch 12 teams playing each other? It really doesn't matter who wins or who doesn't win or what they do. It'll be about as exciting as pre-season friendlies. So it's been knocked on the head. But we have to go a lot further. The German model of 50+1 is a good one, but that is under threat in Germany, where a lot of the big money in Germany wants to defeat the 50+1 and get control of the clubs. Bayern Munich, Borussia Dortmund and others are under pressure to change. And so I do think we have to take it a stage further and bring in real democracy in football, which is what I put forward in our manifesto, which was a subvention on Premier League clubs much bigger than there is at the moment, to fund local soccer, to fund Leagues 1 and 2, and to basically encourage football, because young people, boys and girls playing football, they're fit, they enjoy it, they learn something about themselves, and they learn something about teamwork. It's actually quite an important part of growing up. But if the only message in football is money at the top, which will damage the rest of football, is not good. Now, I support also, a team that gives me a lot of love and pain is Forest Green Rovers. because they are on the cusp of, first of all, direct promotion, and now they're fighting to keep in the playoff zone. Well, that's good. That's exciting. That's fun. That's what football ought to be about. And I think fan power over the past few days has been really good. But let's follow it up. Reduce the ticket prices, democratise the clubs, put the money where it needs to go into grassroots sport and football, not asset stripping of local clubs and selling off of their fields.
Well, I think maybe one of the positives that has come out of the last 48 hours is that it's not just fans, but I think players were crucial in this, and they made it clear to their football club chairman and managing directors that up with this they would not put. So some good may have come out of it. Right, we'll come to more of your questions in a moment. It's 10 to 9.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:54, Elizabeth has emailed to say, very good to have such a civilised conversation and good to hear from Jeremy Corbyn again too. The discourse is always civilised with him. I look forward to having him on again. Perhaps we could broaden the debate by having Piers Morgan on too, but not necessarily together. That way lies madness, I think. Right, I'm going to ask you all to be quite brief in your answers to the next two questions so we can fit them both in before we finish. Maybe 45 seconds for this first one. Joseph in Stockport, does the panel think it's okay for the government to have wasted £2.5 million on a TV studio briefing room that won't be used? Liam Fox.
Well, I think it will be used, and we get this every time we get any public infrastructure at all. To have it there will be useful for every future government as it comes along. I don't think I'll be getting to use it myself, so I don't have to declare a personal interest.
Stewart Hosie.
It's not a piece of public infrastructure. It was a bit of Americana vanity project, a complete waste of time and energy. If the Prime Minister needs to give a COVID response or any other message to the media, he had plenty of other rooms and microphones he could have done it at.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Waste of money. Could have quite easily done it in any other of the many government facilities they've got. And it also smacks of a sort of presidential style of government. And I have to say, the press conferences they did during the height of COVID were unbelievably appalling. Appalling setup, appalling scheme, and not particularly informative. I think what we need is a much more relaxed, inclusive sort of style.
Layla?
Waste of money. Would much rather have seen them spend it on something else. But it does also strike me that it's bizarre that they set all this up, spent £33,000 on broadband. I mean, I don't know what deal they've got, but I tell you, if they just go on moneysavingexpert.com, they will do much better than that. And then they've decided to mothball it. I mean, what were they thinking?
Other money-saving sites are available. Layla, thank you. And thank you all for being very brief on that, which gives us time to go to our final call, which is David in Paddington. Hello, David.
Oh, good evening. Yeah, I'd like to just ask the panel, do they think that the gentleman who threw Keir Starmer and his henchmen out of the pub the other night was right in so much as he was trying to suggest that Starmer is not a socialist, he's a Tory light, and that he's an apologist, abstaining for the Conservatives?
Well, I think his main point was that he should have been questioning the government more on COVID, which was, Jeremy, kind of the point you were making. Do you agree with the pub landlord?
Well, I think it was a bit odd to be walking in a pub anyway when we're supposed to be not going into pubs but merely enjoying them outside. And as one who's done many, many visits to places, I'm a bit surprised he didn't check it out in advance, because it's a bit of an own goal to walk into a pub where the landlord is likely to be hostile. But I think the landlord has a point about questioning the government on COVID. His other views on COVID, I don't know what they are. But it was, I think, a pretty unfortunate incident all round, and could have been avoided.
I'm going to ask you all for this follow-up question to this. Have you ever been involved in slightly buttock-clenchingly embarrassing experiences on a public walkabout? Jeremy, I'll give you time to think about that one for a minute. Liam Fox.
Not that I can think of as being any more awkward than most of the walkabouts that we have. What I would have been certainly asking if I was what Keir Starmer was, what were my team doing, allowing me to go into a place where I was going to get such a bad reception in an era where that was going to
blame the workers, Liam. Blame the workers.
Well, no, I think he'd be asking that, and I actually think it's unfortunate. I know that people are very frustrated. We've all had our frustrations, not being able to see our families, our loved ones, in all of this. But I don't think it adds anything to have that level of aggression and disrespect. I would like to have had the questions asked in a more civilised way. I don't think it actually reflected well on anybody at all in that episode.
Layla?
So, I mean, to the actual incident, I'd be curious to know what happened with the advance team. That is sort of obvious. You check it out.
I want to know why was he in Bath? I mean, it's not exactly a Labour marginal, is it?
Well,
it's not a council that's likely to go Labour.
It's one of the Lib Dems' strongest seats, and it's
not a high bar.
I have to tell you, the Lib Dems were in general quite interested to also know the answer to that question. But nevertheless, to answer your question, have I been involved in any walkabouts that went wrong? Actually, yes, I have. And it was in 2017. Tim Farron came to Kidlington in my constituency.
That would do it.
During the Brexit vote, I actually voted to leave, which was different to the rest of the area. And a gentleman called Malcolm came and pitched up and was shouting him down and was trying to sort of make his point very forcefully. And the thing I remember most about it was that Tim took it on the chin, made a joke of it, brought him in, had a conversation, and literally by the end of it, they hugged it out. And I think it was that, lightness of touch that Tim had that turned the situation around. We didn't see that, unfortunately, with Keir.
Keir couldn't have hugged him, though. That's the problem with COVID, isn't it? There could be no hugs.
But I think that lightness of touch, turning it around, bringing the person in, having a conversation, don't be confrontational.
Stewart Hosie, very briefly, if you could.
If the words and attitudes of the pub landlord are as reported in other news outlets, I don't know why Keir Starmer went there in the first place. That's the first thing I would say. It was a very strange thing to do. And I suspect I wouldn't like to meet Mr. Humphreys, I think that's his name, either. He doesn't sound like a very pleasant man on the subject of COVID. And as to embarrassing walkabouts, I can't think of a walkabout one that was dreadfully embarrassing. But, we'll all know this. Being shouted at or questioned aggressively is an occupational hazard. You've got to take those brickbats as a politician. Otherwise, it's a wee bit hypocritical. It's like ducks complaining about water. I think, on balance, his team should have checked the attitudes of the owner out and decided to go somewhere else.
Betty Boothroyd once said that the two things that you require to be a politician are broad shoulders and thick skin.
Yeah.
Jeremy, any walkabout nightmares that you can recall?
I've done lots of walkabouts, and people come up to you sometimes with bizarre questions, sometimes with conspiracy theories, all kinds of things. You have to stop and listen. You have to give time to people. It drove my team mad. It drives my team completely mad, stopping and listening to people. But one incident was really an incident. It was quite funny, really. This woman was talking to me before a rally once, and as we got into a conversation, it was quite clear to me she was not in any way a Labour supporter. I couldn't really work out why she was there. So I said, if you don't mind me saying, you don't really seem to be a Labour supporter. What are you doing here? He said, well, Mr. Corbyn, I've been reading in the Daily Mail over the past few weeks that you're totally evil, and I've come to see for myself. So I said, and what's the verdict? He said, well, I don't think you're evil. I'm going to stay for your rally if it's all right with you.
Well, I would call that a result, actually. And just finally, Chiara says, I have a question for Jeremy Corbyn. How is El Gato?
El Gato is absolutely fine. He's around here somewhere. He's relaxed. He's happy. He spends his day on the shed roof and his evenings in my study, sitting beside me. He's a very happy cat.
Marvellous. We're delighted to hear that. Well, thank you to all four of you. Haven't got time to ask the rest of you about your cats. Layla Moran, Jeremy Corbyn, Stewart Hosie and Liam Fox, thank you very much indeed. If you missed any of our programme tonight, you can catch up on the Global Player or on the Cross Question podcast, which will be loaded a little bit later. In a moment, we're going to continue the discussion about these texts between James Dyson and Boris Johnson. Keir Starmer says it's Tory sleaze writ large. What do you say? 0345 6060 973. It's 3 minutes past 9.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Boris Johnson's insisted he did the right thing by promising to fix tax changes for Sir James Dyson by text message. The businessman wanted to ensure staff returning to the UK to help build medical ventilators wouldn't be penalised. Shadow Business Minister and Labour MP for Manchester Central, Lucy Powell, told LBC that's why there's a ministerial code.
So that there can be no suggestion that people who happen to be billionaire donors to that political party are seen to get special extra treatment that is not available to the vast majority of business people in this country, whether they are producing PPE, ventilators, hand sanitizer.